Hello, my friends. I'm so grateful that you're here today. My name is Katie Taylor. I am a certified child life specialist. I'm so thrilled to have you here today because we're talking about three things that we haven't talked about in a while, if at all. The first one is about pill swallowing and what it actually is like sometimes when you have to get a child or a tween or a teenager to swallow pills as part of their treatment plan. And Heather, who is the guest that I'm speaking with today, is the mother of a teen who had cancer. And they had the whole consult happen. A child life specialist was consulted to their room to teach her son how to swallow pills. And we'll talk about that. And I bet the ending to that story is not exactly what you think it's going to be. The second thing we talk about is Heather is actually a podcast host. So we talk about how she navigates sharing her story and her experience while still maintaining the privacy that's been requested by her son and that she wants to be able to give her son in terms of both following her passion and doing this podcast, but maintaining his privacy throughout the process. And lastly, I ask her the question, we talk a lot about how doctors and providers and people will tell you that it's not your fault as a parent when your child gets sick, especially sick with something like cancer or whatever it may be, that it's not your fault. And the reality about actually accepting that as an answer is something we'll get into today. So thank you so much to Heather, who is the host of the Navigating Childhood Cancer podcast. I'm so grateful for your time today. Let's jump into the conversation. For those of you who are joining us today, I am not a doctor. I'm not a therapist. I am a child life specialist. And the suggestions and tips and resources that I talk about with parents on this podcast may be great for you and they may not be right for you. So the most important person you can talk to about getting support is your care team, your doctor who knows your story and your child's story. So regardless of maybe what I mention or what other families mention here, we're not licensed therapists, we're not doctors. We're having a conversation about what the parenting journey has been like. So please keep that in mind as you listen today. Hello, my friends. Welcome to Child Life on Call. This podcast is a safe place for parents to share their stories about what it's like to have a child that has a medical experience, diagnosis, disease, and or everything in between. We know there's power in sharing stories and that power multiplies when you can listen to other parents who have walked a similar path to yours. Giving and getting advice is great, but hearing how another parent navigates the complexities and nuances of healthcare is even better. As a child life specialist, my role is to support, validate, and provide emotionally safe spaces for kids and their families, and I am so honored to be on this journey with you. In addition to parent stories, we sprinkle in some expert episodes every now and again that have content for both parents and professionals in the field of healthcare, all with the mission to empower parents to be confident advocates and partners with the care team during healthcare experiences. We're so glad you're here. Well, why don't you start off just by introducing us to who you are, a little bit about yourself, your family, where you're from.
Sure. So my name's Heather. I'm a mother of three. I have three teenage children. My youngest just turned 13. So now I can officially say I'm a mother of teens. So I live with my partner and my three kids. We live in Toronto and I'm self-employed, but I also have a podcast, which I launched about a year ago following my family's experience with childhood cancer. So my child was diagnosed with leukemia in June of 2021. And I felt like we just learned so much from that whole experience. And I've got a few reasons why I decided to start the podcast, but the podcast is a bit of a passion project for me. It's an opportunity for me to share details of our story, not the details about the diagnosis or intimate details about treatment, that kind of thing, but just to talk broadly about what it's like to be a family who experiences a cancer diagnosis. But more importantly, it's an opportunity for me to share the stories of other families who are going through something similar, helping us all work together to understand what we're going through and to process it and to learn from each other.
Yeah, I think that processing piece is so important too, especially as you've gone through it. And, I'm kind of wondering, before your family became a family that has to deal with cancer, were there any misconceptions or thoughts that you had about a family who does face cancer and things that maybe ended up being true or not true?
Well, I think the biggest misconception for me was that it wasn't something that was a possibility for us. So I really actually only knew one other family who had been through this, and it had been many, many years ago. So It's relatively common. I know that I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but childhood cancer is something that's a reality for so many people. And it just never occurred to me that it would be something that would affect my family. So, that was a big surprise. And I don't think anybody wanders around thinking that they're next or that it's a possibility. But I think that was my biggest misconception was, they're kids, they're healthy. There's no reason why they should be, worried about that. So that was
Yeah,
that was a rude
that's
awakening for me.
y- it's such a good point because when you think about maybe another diagnosis or another disease, whether it be because of it's a virus or an infection or DNA wasn't developed in the way it should, cancer doesn't always leave you with answers about why it happened or why it occurred.
It's true. It's true. And actually, that's one of the things. It's not unlike some other forms of cancer. What we continuously are being told is that there's nothing we did to cause this. So it's
Mm,
very random, and it's just it's not like that was one of the things that went through my mind when I first learned about it. Is, oh, what did I do wrong? Right? Did
right,
I not feed him the right foods? Did I
right.
was there a medication I took before I got pregnant? Was there something I could have done to contributed to
Yeah.
this? And our doctors were very reassuring and letting us know that it's as random as it can be. And I hope that there's going to be some way that people are doing the research, and I hope that there are more answers about how to prevent it, or what is
Hmm.
potentially causing it. But it's, I think, most importantly, just not something we're doing in our daily lives intentionally that's causing it.
How long did it take you to really believe that? Because I can imagine at the beginning, you're like, I'm sure they just say this and they want to make me feel better.
Yeah.
And you might have had like that moment that's like, okay, this really wasn't anything you could have done. Did that happen for you right away?
Well, I don't know that I truly still like, I mean,
Mm,
there's lots of things that keep me up at night still.
sure. Yeah.
And, concern over like my responsibility in this whole experience is
Mm,
certainly, of course I worry that again, we were reassured that's not the case, but every once in a while I'll hear about something or wonder, whether there was something I could have done differently. I like to believe it. And on a good day, yes, I continue. And
that's the truth.
it's certainly something I tell other parents too, right?
Yeah.
It was reassuring for me to hear that. But
Thank you for being so vulnerable in that answer because and it's so interesting, right? When you're talking to someone else, it's be like, it's not your fault. You
yes,
didn't do anything wrong. But when to give that to ourselves is often much more challenging.
it's true. It's easy to reassure somebody else, but to believe it myself, that was always tricky. That's tricky.
Right. Right. Well, thank you for being so honest in that answer because I think a lot of people can resonate with that. Do you mind kind of taking us back to the beginning and finding out that something was going on?
Sure. So the first indication for us that something was up, it was actually during COVID. So it was in the winter time and we had been out like at the tobogganing hills actually.
It's so Canadian of
It
you.
was, yeah, exactly. It was, it was during COVID and we were sort of avoiding indoor gatherings. And so we would take the kids out to the park and go tobogganing and the kids would play on the river. And my child fell that day and he felt like he kind of like hurt his back. He wrenched his back. And, we took him home, it was not really a big concern, but it never really seemed to get better. So he had a sore back for a period of time. And then it was still kind of bothering him in the spring. And we just thought it was like just because he had fallen that day. But it was just unusual that it never got better. So we took him to the doctor. She recommended maybe some physiotherapy. And he was 14 at the time. So we started physiotherapy and he was unable to do most of the things that the physiotherapist was recommending, stretches and things
Mm,
like that to try to help alleviate the pain in his back. So we then, sort of pushed further because we're like, 14-year-old boy should be able to like bend down and touch his toes without pain, or, for example, be able to get up off the floor. He'd get down on the floor to do some stretches and then it would really struggle to get up. So we were then sent to a specialist to check out his spine and see if there was something that had happened. And what had happened was that it was actually the pain in his back was actually not caused by the fall that day. It was actually, it was the leukemia he had. So the leukemic cells were forming blasts, which were sort of, excuse me for not having the proper medical terminology.
oh, no, that's
Um,
okay. We don't need that here.
but as I
You can call
understand
it
it,
bumps, circles, whatever you want to say.
I know it's true, right? We learn a lot about like we become sort of like medical professionals really quickly, but it's still, I still am not the one to be explaining this.
Yes.
So anyhow, the cancer was essentially forming in his spine. And so it was gathering and it was causing some pressure from the inside the bone marrow.
Mm.
It was creating pressure on his back. In fact, it was causing compression fractures. So that's why he had pain in
Wow.
his back. Anyways, but the orthopedic surgeon who we had seen wasn't sure exactly. Of course, he couldn't tell that's what it was, but he actually did some blood work. And the blood work that came back was a little bit alarming. He had really low counts. And so he just recommended, he thought maybe there was an infection or something else. But he said, I think given these results in your blood work, you really need to go down to the ER and be seen by somebody at the Children's Hospital. So that sort of started off, a trip down to the ER. And we left, but we never,
Mm.
we ended up being admitted that day because they were also alarmed by what they were seeing and felt like further tests needed to be conducted. And all of that took us to a place where we received the diagnosis that he had leukemia. And leukemia, of course, is a cancer of the blood. So his case, it was acute lymphoblastic leukemia type B, which is the cancer of the white blood cells that are produced in the bone marrow. And that started off a journey of some very intense treatment. It's currently his treatment involved 27 months of chemotherapy. So it literally started immediately. Once they caught it, treatment literally starts a couple of days later and off we went.
Yeah. We have such this like innate part of us as parents to protect our kids. And I'm sure you're thinking about protecting him from pain, protecting him from fear, from being scared of what's about to happen. But you also have a 14-year-old, it's not a 3-year-old. How did you navigate, wanting to protect your baby,
Mhm.
but also wanting to keep him engaged and up to speed about what was happening?
I think that was actually the bigger challenge for me was of course, I mean, nobody wishes this upon anybody they know, least of all their child. But for me, the biggest fear for him was the disappointment of everything that was going to change for him in his life. So before I even got to the pain and the nausea and all the side effects of chemotherapy, before I even began to think about that,
Yeah.
I was worried about his disappointment over. So this was June, over the summer that he had planned. Like again, it was during COVID and we were kind of starting to get outside again. And he
Right.
had plans to reconnect with his friends and he had plans to get away for weekends. And that all got shut down. No, we can't go away this weekend. And he was, again, he's a 14-year-old boy, but he's also a child,
Yeah.
still a child, right? So
Yes.
he's more disappointed over his canceled plans from the weekend than he is about like the big news. And whether
Yeah.
he fully understood it in the beginning, I can't say for sure. But as a teenager, he was like actually in the room when we got this news. That was actually a really important part of this whole experience for me too, was understanding that still a child, but he also is a person and
Mm.
a person whose health we're now discussing, right? Decisions that need
Right.
to be made are going to actually involve him. And he's like an equal member of the group of people that is sitting here discussing it and making decisions about his future.
Right.
So,
Right.
but the biggest disappointment for him was that, the change of plans.
Mm.
That this wasn't what we had planned for the summer or the year ahead or, his life really. And that was pretty disappointing for him. And so that was pretty hard for me.
Yeah. Well, it makes so much sense. And, as child life specialists, we kind of know that about teenagers, right? That they're more concerned with how their inner circle is going to change, what they're going to miss out on with their friends. We'll be right back. Finding a solution to support and ease your child's daily bowel movements and improve everyday health can feel like a challenge. 30% of children struggle with constipation, and it can feel impossible trying to find a solution for your child. Especially if your child has food allergies or has a condition or illness, you want to feel good about the products you're selecting for your child. To me, finding a company whose products have the highest quality and natural ingredients is really important. Begin Health's flagship product, Growing Up Prebiotics, is a tasteless, textureless fine powder that easily mixes into water, juice, or smoothies. This makes it convenient for daily use without altering the flavor of your child's favorite beverages. You might ask yourself, what exactly does a prebiotic do? In the simplest of terms, the gut microbiome, aka bacteria, viruses, and fungi, are living organisms that are inside our intestines and on our skin. Begin Prebiotics feed these living organisms with the unique blend of human milk, oligosaccharides, HMOs, and fiber from chicory root inulin. Research has shown that the gut microbiome plays a significant role in the development of the immune system, digestion, and production of some vitamins and proteins. And get this, Begin Health's mission extends beyond nutrition, offering comprehensive resources for caregivers, including parent support groups and tools to create fun and engaging ways to get your kiddo to have smooth poos. To learn more about Begin Health's product, visit their website at beginhealth.com. And again, that's www.beginhealth.com. The growing little gut is the command center of early health. And here at Child Life On Call, we're helping to spread the word of investing in gut health positive routines starting at the earliest of ages. Child Life On Call podcast listeners get 25% off selected products, and you're definitely going to want to get the poop tracker game cards and stickers. You know, Child Life specialists love a good sticker. This applies to your first subscription order and one-time orders and limited to one use per customer. Head to beginhealth.com/childlifeoncall and use code childlifeoncall to get 25% off. But from an adult perspective, it's like, no, you've just been given a very scary diagnosis. So it
Mhm.
can be hard sometimes for both parties to see from the other side. Who were some of the support people that helped guide you in the hospital and helped guide you through your treatment?
We had so many. We had such a wonderful team. I just can't say enough about the healthcare providers that guided us through this whole journey. I mean, it started off with the doctors. We were assigned an oncology fellow who was kind of our main point of contact throughout the entire treatment protocol. She was incredible. So she's the person we met with weekly, and she guided us. She spent time with us. She answered all of our questions. Actually, she and my son developed a pretty great rapport. She
Mm,
his questions.
yeah.
He obviously felt really safe in her care and was able to speak with her quite openly. So she was wonderful. I mean, every single one of the nurses at the hospital, every single person who we met was amazing to us and was caring. And I just remember one, for example, I actually went over my notes in preparation for our
Yeah.
conversation.
Oh.
And I was reminded the very first day that I was in the eighth floor. The eighth floor at Sick Kids is the oncology floor. And the first nurse that was sort of standing beside me at the bedside when he was recovering from his first lumbar puncture asked me how I was doing.
Mm,
And I said, "Oh, well, I mean, obviously I'm stressed and I'm super worried." She's like, "Have you had anything to eat today? Because you need to take care of yourself too, right? Don't forget that you," and I hadn't. It was like 2 p.m. and I hadn't eaten. So that was the first, indication of the fact that I'm
yeah.
dealing with some really special people here who are, they're here to obviously deal with the illness, but they're also caring about the family, right? Caring about the child, but also the family. So that was
Mm.
pretty great. And had a social worker who helped us through some tough times. And we also had a child life specialist who we could rely upon for some other tough moments. I've got a really nice story actually about our child life specialist. If it's okay, I'd
Oh,
love to
I would
share
love
it.
to hear
Yeah.
it. Yes, of course.
So, one of the things that was tough for my child was swallowing pills. So, it wasn't something that he had had to do really much of before this diagnosis. And of course, his medication came in many different forms, lots of intravenous, intrathecal, as well as oral medications that he had to take. And some of it could be taken, through a syringe, but many of it, every day, he had to take tablets that he had to swallow. And in the beginning, like one of our early days, second, third day in the hospital, a child life specialist came to our room to help him to practice swallowing pills. And, they start with nerds and you
Yes.
graduate to M&Ms. Like it was a fun little encounter, but my son was not interested. He said he couldn't do it. He didn't want to practice. Trying made him feel worse. And she had all the tricks, but he was also feeling terribly and he just didn't want
Yeah.
to participate. So we went home after we had our first sort of 2 weeks was in hospital of treatment. And then we went home with like, a massive calendar of medications that he had to take and like all these bottles of pills. And so every night to sit down and take this medication was a real struggle. And we would be at the table for an hour or more while he struggled with
Mm.
doing it. So I said, "Well, I think we need to go in and talk to the child life specialist. I think we need another session about swallowing pills." So I contacted them. And the next time we were in the hospital, we saw her. And she said, "Okay, like, so what's up?" And I said, it was also very frustrating for me. I like don't feel proud of this admission, but I was getting really frustrated. Like, just try,
Of
like, just,
course.
and sometimes we'd have to sort of trade off. Like, I'd be doing meds at the table with him, and then I'd be like,
Yeah.
"Okay, you know what? I need a minute. I'm going to go. Let's let dad step in and take a turn."
Yes.
So when we went in to speak with the child life specialist, she said, "What's the problem? What's going on?" And I said, like in my frustrated tone, like, he just won't practice swallowing the pills and it's a big ordeal. And I just really wish he could learn how to swallow the pills that he has to take. And she said, okay, well, what do you think? She turned to my son and said, what's happening for you? What's going on? And he just said, I don't like it. I don't know how to do it. And it's the last thing I really care about right now. I just want to get it in. I don't. She said, do you want to practice? Do you want to learn how to swallow pills? And he said, no, I don't like it. And I don't want to. I don't want to. So
Hmm.
she turned to me and she said, listen, I know this is really hard, but he's got a lot on his plate right now. So maybe like grinding the pills and taking an hour to do it every night is like, we can like let go of the pressure to learn how to swallow them. And
Yeah.
let's just focus on what he needs to help him get comfortable. And let's just be happy that he's getting the meds in. And, you know, we might just have to accept that this is how it needs to
Mm.
happen right now. So I had a good cry over that one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I felt so badly. Like, again, I mean, I was also stressed. I'm trying to
Of
remember
course.
that I
And
was
you're
in
like, "This is life-saving medication, and you body needs
exactly.
this," like yes.
Exactly. So, and it was hard, right? It was just really hard. But she, she acknowledged that he's the patient and he's the one that gets to decide how he takes his meds. And, she did have some suggestions about how we could, maybe make it a little bit easier. But she also just diffused the situation, right? So I was
Mm.
able to sort of accept that answer and back off on like my pressure in terms of how I wanted to see him approach it. And so then meds became a different experience for us. And I really thank her for that because, it was hard. It was really hard for a time there. And then it became, just part of our daily routine. And that was a really important moment for me.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you for sharing that because it's so true. We especially when there's such a lack of control on your end, right?
Yes. Yeah.
There's only so much you can do to help your son. And one of them is getting him to take his medications, right? And wow, I just thank you for sharing that. And thank you for sharing that sometimes the answer isn't what you think it's going to be in your head, that
Yes.
she's going to have some magic way to get him to swallow his pills,
That's right.
right? That we've just haven't taught him yet. It's this one trick that's going to change everything. Sometimes that's not the end. That's not how it ends.
That's right. And the answer was like a surprise to me. And actually, again, it literally, it was such a long time that he had to take those meds that
Yeah.
that conversation so early on in the process just like made life so much easier for us for like
Mm.
years, literally years to come. So
Wow.
that just sort of highlights for me the importance of that role. So,
Mm.
you know,
Thank you. Well, and
so
for all of those healthcare providers who are listening and you consult the child life specialist to teach pill swallowing and you're upset that it's not done in an hour, this is what we're talking about.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And like I said, she had all the tricks. I'm sure that
Sure.
it probably works most of the time, but
No, it
um,
doesn't. I mean, it just depends on the situation. I mean, everything is a variable and everything is gray. It's not always black and white. So thank you for sharing that. So you said that you were looking back at some of your notes from that
mhm,
day. So did you journal? Did you take notes during
I
that
did.
time? And was that something you've always done? Or did it occur to you that this might be helpful when you were like going through this traumatic experience?
So I don't journal on a regular basis. I do write. So it's just again, a sort of a side thing that I enjoy to do. I started taking notes just to try to record everything that the doctors and the nurses were telling us. So I had the notes app on my phone.
Yeah.
And of course, I was just like, furiously trying to keep up with the diagnosis and the treatment plan and everything. Every time we had a meeting, I would be taking notes on what was happening. But then I also started to keep track of my observations. I was also sort of seeing how he was doing. And then, like, started to record experiences. Like, for example, I'd say, on the way in today, we saw this, or this made us smile. Or, I started to like not just take the notes about the medical details that I was trying to keep, but I
Mm,
also started to, just pay attention to everything that's going on
yeah.
around us. Then I would sometimes get home, and like write it out. So I'd sit down at my computer and just sort of like debrief on the day. Yeah, that was important to me because I'm so grateful that I have that now too, because it's a record of everything that we went through.
Sure.
And it was also really important to me to remember the names of the people. So, you know, we had some nurses that we saw on a pretty regular basis, but there are many of them. Like there's hundreds of
Mm.
nurses in that hospital.
Yeah.
And I just felt really like it was important to me to remember their names. So that was also something I tried to keep track of. Keeping track of all of it to be able to now go back and look at what it was like that day It's
Mm,
because the other part I'll just share is that his treatment ended last October. And so we're now, many months, almost a year out of treatment. And sometimes it's easy to forget how hard it was or,
right.
what it was like on that particular day. I have photos too. I took a lot of photos during that time. I want to always remember because I also feel it's important. It's again, I'll talk about the podcast in a second, but I feel
Yeah.
like I have a responsibility being on the other side of this whole experience, to share and to support and do everything I can to, raise awareness, etc. So it's helpful to me to be able to go back and to take a look at what we actually went through.
Yeah, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about your podcast and, what finding a community for you felt like during that time and now, right? Because it's never really over after you have a child with cancer.
It's true. It's true. Somebody said, we talk about it being a club. You've like unfortunately
Mm,
joined a club that nobody wants to be a part of. But the good part of it is that we have like the best members. Like none of
nice.
us wants to be here, but once we're in, we're like, people are very supportive and there's a lot of sharing that happens. I actually didn't feel like there was much of a community when this first started. It was during COVID. So
Yeah.
a couple of things. One was that there was no like it was just one parent at a time that was in the hospital. So we were kind of isolated that way. Also, everybody was masked in the hospital, which I don't know whether that's common. I don't think it is. But we were all, also very highly aware of the fact that our children were in such a compromised state. So
Right.
we were pretty isolated, even in the waiting area, sort of like kept to ourselves, keeping on opposite sides of the room, et cetera. So
Yeah.
it did not feel a big sense of community at that time, but it grew, it came. So I was introduced to another family that had a teenager that was in a similar situation. And we spoke on the phone, and I realized how important it was to be able to connect with somebody that was going through something so similarly. So,
Yeah.
to be able to exchange, terminology that somebody else recognized, or to sort of like share sort of some of those deep fears that we weren't really able to put a name to. We related in a way that I hadn't experienced until I actually had that conversation with that other parent. So that sort of made me realize, like, actually, I think I need to do something about this.
Yeah.
I was actually sort of the genesis behind the podcast that if I'm feeling this way and we are both having the same conversation, there must be other people out there that are having a similar experience. One conversation I had with another parent, we spent an hour just talking in the foyer of the hospital about our
Yeah.
teenagers. And I kept thinking to myself, like, this would be good information for a podcast. Like, we're talking about
Yeah.
school or how you can handle school and how do you help your kid get back into, sports, for example, afterwards.
Right.
And it just felt like, other parents are probably having the same
Yeah.
conversations. So that was
Yeah.
kind of the reason behind it.
Yeah, and you know better than anyone what someone who's going through it needs because it was something that you needed and that you wished you had and now you're a gap filler. So you're filling those gaps.
Yeah, it's true. It also was partially because I felt like I didn't. I mean, they say not to Google, right? So I was trying to avoid Google, but I was looking for information, like
Yeah.
even something as simple as taking medication. How do you help your teenager take meds? Like,
Yeah.
we spoke to our child life specialist, but that's the kind of thing you're looking for
Yeah.
someone else's experience
Yeah.
to be able to help
Absolutely.
you through it.
There's one other special part of your story that I want to talk about and that's, the now being on a podcast and sharing what you've gone through, so much of here at Child Life on Call, what we do is focus on the parent journey and what it was like for you and what helped you and got you through it. But when you're speaking about someone in your family's experience, I know you guys pay really close attention to what you say, how you say it, and getting permission. And talk a little bit about how that conversation went with your teenager when you said, I want to start this podcast.
hmm So my child has always been very private about this whole experience. So we shared it with our family and friends, close family and friends, but it's not something that I posted widely. So I
Yeah.
didn't share it on social media. I was just cautious. Like people who were
Right.
close to us knew about it, but it's not something that I post about regularly. Or I'm not,
Yeah.
when I sort of had this realization that I wanted to talk about our experience, I went to my kid. I actually went to him and said, like, what do you think about this? I feel like there's a lot of other parents out there that are supporting children in your exact situation who could really benefit from a podcast about this. And how do you feel about that? I
Yeah.
wanted to make sure because I can share my story. I'm talking to you today about my experience, but this is
Yeah.
also his experience.
Right.
And knowing that he's a private person and didn't want it all over social media, why would he then be okay with me talking about it in a podcast?
Yeah.
So at first he didn't love the idea, but I talked to him about sort of the benefits of it and how it could help other families.
Hmm.
And I also we talked about ways that I could cover this topic without revealing his identity or while still maintaining his privacy. So
Mm.
we agreed that I could share some of the details of his experience, but not use his name. So I've
Hmm.
honored that throughout my whole journey,
Yeah.
my podcasting journey. He's also learned, it's been a year now that I've been hosting this podcast, and it doesn't really filter through into like his area of life. So by
Right.
that I mean I don't post about it on my so for example, let's say on Instagram, I do have an personal Instagram account. I have my kids on there with me and our
Yeah.
friends and whatnot. I don't post about my podcast in my personal life. So
Right.
this is something that is meant for other families in this
Mm.
arena. And so what he's discovered there's not a lot of overlap. And so
Yeah.
his friends aren't listening to my podcast.
Yeah.
They're not really seeing it in they're
Sure.
on different social media platforms probably too. So there hasn't been a lot of overlap. And he endorses the project and he just said, but I just don't want to have any part of it. He's trying to move on with his life in his own
Yeah.
way. And I
Yeah.
completely respect that. I'm moving on in my own way too, but this is just
Mm.
a project that feels important to me right now. So we're able to do both.
I love it.
Which
I
we're
love
good.
it. I mean, podcasting hasn't been around for forever and people are sharing stories all over the place, whether it's their
Mhm.
social media. And so it's just I appreciate you telling us how you guys navigated it because I think it might open up more conversations for others. Well, where can people listen to your podcast? What's it called? And how do we follow you on your public social media
Sure.
and keep
So
following along?
the podcast is called Navigating Childhood Cancer, and it is available anywhere you find your podcasts. So Apple Podcasts, Spotify, everywhere. I have a website that you can go to see back episodes. It's navigatingchildhoodcancer.com. And on social media, it's NCC Podcast at NCC Podcast, where you can come to find me. I'll also I want to just thank you for what you're doing as well, because your podcast, I feel like in some ways we're doing a bit of a similar thing, talking to families. And obviously our focus in my life is predominantly about cancer, but I just
Yeah.
need to mention that you've been doing this and, your podcast is also a real service to people that are navigating different illnesses in the healthcare field. And I
Well,
just want to
thank
thank
you
you for
for
it
saying
because
that.
I love what you're doing.
Thank you. And I love what you're doing. And I hope that you have felt this, but I feel like some of my greatest friends in this online world are other podcasting parents. And it's a special little group. And I love being a part of it. And there's space for all of us. So much of what we share is going to resonate with some people and it's not going to resonate with others. And having options breeds more goodness into the world. So I'm so happy to be able to be alongside you on this journey and appreciate you being here.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Yes, thank you. You guys, I have the best news. If you didn't hear it at the beginning of the episode, Support Spot, our app, is now available for every parent. You no longer need a hospital code to log in. So go ahead and go to childlifeoncall.com/supportspot and download our app today. Hospitals and child life specialists, yes, we are still partnering with you if you want to customize content or provide this app to your families free of charge. We're so grateful that you're here. When you rate and review this podcast, it helps other families be able to find us. So let's keep doing that. And I will see you again here next week.